Welcome to MACC Talk, a Middle Tennessee podcast from Mont Haven Arts and Cultural Center in Hendersonville, Tennessee. I am Ruth Chase, the MACC's Regional Arts Director. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Matters of the Heart Counseling.
Thank you, Ruth, and welcome everyone to MACC Talk. I'm your host, John Pitcher. We like to think of the MACC as a cultural town square where we encourage everyone to be their creative best. Ruth, what sort of creative things have you been doing this week?
Well, I've been painting as usual in my studio, but more interesting to me is working with copper and how it affects my garden. So that has a lot to do with, as I'm learning, that copper conducts energy. So I took some copper wire, wrapped around a stick I got out of the lake, stuck it into the ground. It swirls all the way up around the stick and around the top. And in the last 3 days, my tomato plant has gone from upright to literally wrapping itself around the copper, and I have a ton of new flowers.
Wow, it's attracted to the copper.
It is. It's supposed to conduct energy, so it increases growth and it naturally creates a pesticide, but it attracts bees.
Oh my gosh. And if you put like a scary head on it, it could be a scarecrow too.
Probably.
There you
Yeah,
go.
it'd have a lot of purpose.
Yeah. Well, we're in the middle of an election season, which is a perfect time to talk with today's guest. David Farmerie is a veteran photojournalist who's been traveling the country trying to figure out why Americans seem so polarized. His photographs of ordinary Americans living extraordinary lives is now part of a photographic exhibit called In Search of America. David, welcome to MACC Talk.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
What inspired you to go in search of America?
It was back in 2015, and I was sitting in a diner. I was on an assignment in the Mississippi Delta, and I was in the diner, and there was a flat screen TV, and it had, and I don't remember what media channel it was, but they were having a panel discussion. And anyhow, at the end of this, they basically summarized it and said that, America's in the toilet, all Americans hate each other, we're irreparably divided. And it gnawed at me, and I thought there had to be more, but nobody thought that there was. And so I decided to go on the road to find out. And my original plan was take a year off of assignment work and travel around the United States. I ended up taking assignment work, and I traveled for 4.5 years.
One of the things that struck me when I first started looking at your project, it reminded me a little bit of a liner note I saw in a John Prine anthology. I think he said something like, "I still love America, I just don't know where to find it."
That's a profound statement. And if you don't go looking for it, you may not find it.
Right.
But what I found is that the majority of Americans don't hate one another. And the majority of Americans actually want to get along. In fact, while I was doing the project, Harvard published a study that they did. And this was, I think the study was in 2017, 2018. And they found that only 31, maybe 32%, I forget the exact number, of Americans really hate each other. And that left roughly 70% of Americans that actually wanted to get along. And that's what I found on the road.
Right. And yet probably a good 75% just don't know how to listen to one another. So, hence they really don't know their fellow Americans very well.
That what you said there is one of the quintessential things that I found is that they don't listen. And we have to listen when we have a conversation. It's just like we're sitting here now, talking, and you're listening, and I'm listening to what you say. And it's about being respectful in our responses to the other person and not trying to convince the other person of our point of view, but respecting theirs and just have dialogue to understand one another better. And then everything works out well.
I hope that's not a perishable skill that people are losing the more they're plugged into their cell phones. They're not necessarily learning how to listen and talk and respect what the other person is saying.
That is such a valid point. And social media for me has been the greatest culprit to our demise. and there is a demise. And there's a term that I've coined through all of this, and it's called micro-tribalism. And that's come out of primarily social media, because we've always been tribal. I mean, if you look at any sports fan, I mean, this is tribalism 101. We paint our faces, we wear the team's colors, whatever. That's great. We can celebrate that. But micro-tribalism is when you say, okay, I like A, I like B, I don't like C. So if you like A, you're ambivalent on B, and you don't like C, you can't be in my tribe because you're ambivalent on one of them. But that causes people to become very closed-minded. And then they don't want to let any other information in because that may rock their foundation. And there's the danger. And social media has been the great exasperator of that. So yeah, we need to get away from that and start talking with one another again.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you about your approach, because you've gone all over the country. I think you've logged, over 300,000 miles, photographing, I guess you might say, everyday Americans living their remarkable lives. And, there have been other journalists in the past who've really made a name for themselves doing something like that. Ernie Pyle in World War II, took photos of the ordinary GIs. And he got a lot of attention. He wasn't just, interviewing Eisenhower. He was interviewing just some soldier in the trench. And you had Charles Kuralt, who's on the road, shooting for CBS. Stutz Terkel liked to talk to the average American. What makes your project a little different?
Great question. That everybody that had done it in the past, one of the most famous, I think, is John Steinbeck's book, Travels with Charlie.
Right.
Excuse me. An incredible book. But each of these journeys that people took is, for the most part, they had a predetermined route that they took, and they stuck to it. And then they would drive through a town, and if they happened to come across people to talk with, they would. Now, Charles Kuralt was different. He had a predetermined route, but he would go and spend time and find stories and then tell the story. So he spent a little bit of time. But with me, every place I went, I revisited over and over and over again. And each time I would revisit, I would spend anywhere from 5 days to 4 weeks.
Well, you embed it, right?
I embedded it.
Seriously.
I did.
You went there and lived with these people.
I did. I lived with people. I broke bread with people. I worshiped with people of all different faiths. And I got to know people as people.
I think one of the things that has fascinated me the most about looking at the photos is just the diversity that you find. And I think that in and of itself says a lot to me. I mean, what other country has such diversity?
You're right.
And how remarkable that we actually do live so peacefully together.
And that is, wow, this is such a passionate thing for me, this diversity, is that, so many people are screaming now about, we can't have this diversity. We can't let other people in. We can't. Well, first of all, we're all here. Who was it? I forget who it was that said that, we're all immigrants. With the exception of the American native, we're all immigrants to this country because our ancestors, and they said, and I wish I could remember who said this, but they said, but it was our ancestors that came here initially that were the brave ones. And we've lived off of their bravery. But instead of worrying about diversity coming in and, that may change us or change the way of life, embrace it and learn from it. And if you do that, then you find all this added joy to life. Because embracing diversity, you learn about cultures, you learn about food, you learn about all kinds of things, and you can incorporate those into your own world and make it harmonious as opposed to a conflict.
Yeah. Let me ask you about your photos in Selma, Alabama. I believe that's where the project really got started. It was the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights March at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Tell me, what do those photos to you, what do they tell us about America?
I'm so glad you brought this up. The way that came about is it was about 2 weeks before I was planning to leave. And I got an email from a client offering me an assignment. And it was to cover the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday in Selma. And I said, yes, I'll take it. I have to. I can't turn this down. So it meant I had to leave a week early. But I thought, that's great. I'll do the assignment and I'll move on to start the project in Louisiana. And I got there and I arrived on Saturday. And Saturday was a different kind of event. That's where President Obama was there and other dignitaries came in. John Lewis was there. But on Sunday, people came to Selma on Sunday to make a pilgrimage walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And by roughly 11 a.m., maybe noon, somewhere in there were an estimated 20,000 plus people that were there trying to make their way across the bridge. And this is a 2-lane road.
Just imagine that many people coming over at once.
Yeah, and also by this time, the temperature had risen. It was hot and it was humid, and people were physically almost touching each other. They were so packed in, and they had to inch their way over the bridge. It took roughly 6 hours for everybody to make it across. And in that 6-hour period, you had this group of people, 20,000 plus people, of pretty much every ethnicity, every lifestyle, everything. It was so diverse. And there was not one incident, not one, where there was any outrage or condemnation for anything or brutal protesting. It was just calm. It was peaceful. And at one point, and there's a photograph of this in the exhibit, where in this sea of people, rising above it is a huge flag that just said love. Mm-hmm. And that was what that day was. And that day showed me, it answered my question, which was, is this all America is about? That showed me right there that we can get along, and we do get along.
Mm-hmm. I think that the photo from that particular shoot that moved me the most was a little boy holding his tie coming across the bridge. It was almost like a symbol of the future. That's America's future.
You got that. You nailed that. Dead on. That is, for me, that is the quintessential image that I made from that whole time in Selma.
Well, that one choked me up. That was such a beautiful and deeply moving photo.
Thank you.
You captured the essence in that little boy of what the entire day was.
Exactly. Thank you for getting it. No, I mean that sincerely, because for me, even when I look at the photograph now, the clouds it was heavy overcast, and that morning it was about 8 a.m., 8:30 a.m., and I saw this boy with his family making their return walk across the bridge, and and I just got down on one knee because I wanted a low angle, and I put the camera to my eye and I just let them walk towards me. And as he got within about 3 feet, I made that image, and for whatever reason, he grabbed his tie, which was just great, But the image for me is you have the clouds that are starting to break apart. So you have bits of light that are coming through. And then behind him is the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which is like that signifies everything that happened then. And this young black boy is walking out of his past and leaving it behind him and walking into his potential future. And that, to me, I had to hold back from weeping when I saw that moment and looking through the viewfinder. So thank you for that.
It was a beautiful way to just say in ways that words cannot. Exactly what your project was.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to break for an important message, and when we return, we're going to talk with photographer and photojournalist David Farmerie about his experience wrestling alligators.
Matters of the Heart Counseling reminds us that arts education is an essential part of a balanced education. It helps students develop creativity, critical thinking skills, and problem solving. Matters of the Heart Counseling, with locations in Hendersonville, Goodlettsville, and Gallatin. Find them online at mattersoftheheartcounseling.org.
Okay, so we are back with David Farmerie. You photographed Cajuns in Louisiana, and let's start with you getting bitten by an alligator. Tell me a little bit about that whole experience.
That was, sorry, I choked on my drink because that's a great story. I as part of documenting the Cajun culture, which is multi-layered and an absolutely fascinating culture, I wanted to photograph alligator hunting because it's so much a part of the culture. And so I went out and I photographed it. And I had my friend, a guy that became my friend, Gene Seneca, who connected me with the culture. I was in his boat, so I photographed it from a vantage point of not being in the boat where the hunters were. And anyhow, we finished it, and I said to Gene, I feel like there's something more. And I said, do you know anybody else I can go out with? And he thought about it. He said, there's Junior Edwards. And Junior was part of a reality show that's on some channel called Swamp People. And I said, well, do you know Junior? He said, no. I said, okay. He said, but I think I know where he lives. So anyhow, long story short, we go and meet Junior. Everything works out. I go out alligator hunting with him. And now I'm in the boat. And there's a photograph in the exhibition of Junior when he realizes that there's an alligator on the end of the line, so to speak, and it's this little 1/8-inch green cord. And most of the gators were about 4 feet long, 5 feet long. This one was somewhere around 12 feet, 12, 13 feet.
Oh my God, how did he get that in the boat?
Yeah, thank God. His wife was there, Teresa, and she's, wow, what an amazing woman. But he had to wrestle this, and then, he finally got it into a position, and he took his rifle, and he shot it, and they have to shoot it in the very specific part of the back of the head. Mm-hmm. And, he killed the alligator. And what's amazing is when they shoot it, it kills the alligator, but it goes into what I can only describe as a death roll. Mm. And it starts thrashing and rolling in the water, and it's violent. Mm-hmm. And he brings it into the boat, and, we take off, and Junior's in the back of the boat, and I'm in the front of the boat. And we're going along, and I feel this pressure, increasingly building on my left ankle. I'm like, what the heck? And I look down, and that dead 12-foot alligator had its jaws around my ankle, and it was slowly closing and getting tighter and tighter. And, so I yelled back to Junior. I had to wave and get his attention because, he had the engine going. I said, Junior, and I pointed down. He said, remember I told you, bring a knife. You take your knife, stick it in the bullet hole and wiggle it. I'm like, okay. So I took out my knife and I opened it up and I bent down and I put it in the bullet hole and wiggled it. And sure enough, then just as slowly, the jaws started to open back up. And I pulled my ankle out and pulled the knife out, and that was the end of it. But yeah.
I love just the routine calmness of this guy when an alligator is biting your ankle and says, oh yeah, just stick your knife in that bullet hole, wiggle it around, you'll be fine.
Yeah, and that's the way Junior was. In fact, at one point, Junior, he stopped to check a hook, and it was empty. And unbeknownst to me, he saw an alligator swimming from the shoreline out. And he picks up his rifle, and he's aiming. I'm thinking, okay, he's going to shoot something. And I had an ultra-wide angle lens, so perspective was off. And as he's moving, and I'm watching him through the lens, the angle of the rifle started out about 45 degrees from me. And then that started to narrow significantly. And all of a sudden, when he fired, the bullet literally passed so close to my ear that it cracked the eardrum. It bled. Wow. And so it missed my head by a minuscule amount.
And you thought the alligator was bad.
Yeah. And I said, I said, Junior. I said, Junior. He said, what? I said, you damn near shot me. He said, oh. He said, yeah. He starts to chuckle. He said, I shot Willie twice. That's his son. and Teresa sitting there just shaking her head saying, yeah, he did. He gets so uber focused that he doesn't realize anything else is around. And if you're in that line, wow, you're in trouble. So fortunately, I was a couple centimeters over, so it all worked out. But that's Junior. He's just laid back.
Well, you've had a 4 decades long career, if I'm not mistaken, as a photographer. You've done a lot of things. I think I read somewhere that your specialty, at least early on, was photographing indigenous peoples. Is that right? Including cultures that were sort of on their way out.
Yeah, indigenous and vanishing cultures.
Vanishing cultures. Yeah. Well, tell me about the Cajuns. I mean, do they fit into that category, or what do they tell us about America?
Yeah, that's another great question. The Cajuns, much like the American natives, that they came here and settled, and they were given land by the Spanish, who owned the territory at the time, which is now Louisiana. But the Spanish gave them the land that nobody could use, which was the swamps. And so they developed it, and they were able to make a living and live, off the land. But then as it was taken over by the U.S. and the territories were owned, it became a part of the United States, that they were no longer allowed to speak their language, the Cajuns. And again, much like the American natives, in school, if they spoke that language, they were beaten physically. And so they almost lost it. And then I guess about a year, maybe 2 years before I started this project, they started to come back, started to embrace their culture, relearn the language, the Cajun French. In fact, in the town of Beaubridge, the street signs are in English and French both. And so they reclaimed it. They were almost an extinct culture. But, because somebody said, hey, no, let's reclaim this, they were able to reclaim it. And that's something that most of the American native cultures have not been able to do.
Okay. How are the Cajuns different from other people you met on your journeys?
Kinder. In fact, there's a word, the first day I spoke with my contact guy, Gene Seneca, one of the first things he told me is there's a word in Cajun, it's len yape, and that means a little more, a little extra. And that's the Cajun way of life. So, to put it in simple terms, if I want a pound of coffee, they're going to give me a pound and an eighth. Everything is a little more. But their hospitality, there wasn't one person. In fact, there were times like Gene and I would be heading up a bayou in his boat, and we'd see people on the shoreline, and Gene say, hey, I don't know them. I'm going to go over and introduce myself. And we would. And within 10, 15 minutes, we were sitting in their kitchen having coffee, and they were making us biscuits. And that wasn't an anomaly. That was the norm. Everybody just opened their hearts up to you. And I haven't seen that so much to that extent anywhere else.
Right. They have sort of a cultural gesture of generosity that's just built in.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. And you'll find that in their food, in their music, in every aspect of their culture. It's everywhere. It's just that giving more.
Wow, that is amazing. Well, we're going to break here in a moment. We're going to return to speak with the photojournalist David Farmerie, who has an exhibit called In Search of America. We're going to have that exhibit at Monhaven at some point, hopefully early 2025.
Yes.
I believe.
Yeah.
When we return, we're going to talk to David about his favorite road food.
Matters of the Heart Counseling reminds parents to encourage your student to get involved in both art and athletics. Engaging in art as well as physical activity elevates your mood and stimulates your brain. The ability to balance creative expression with teamwork and discipline is a valuable asset in today's multifaceted world. Matters of the Heart. Online, mattersoftheheartcounseling.org.
Okay, well, we're back with the photojournalist David Farmerie, who has created this wonderful years-long project called In Search of America. It's a photographic project. There are some really amazing photos in there of various diners, including a Waffle House, and some of the workers who are just very expressive. Some of the most expressive photos I've seen. And I can't think of a better symbol of sort of the American road than the diner. Tell me a little bit about this experience.
I need to start it with a backstory. When I was a kid, every so often on a Sunday, my dad would pack me and my mom into the car, this big old Oldsmobile. And his thing was, let's just drive until we're completely lost. And then we'll pull out the map, which was my mother's job, and we'll find our way home. But when we did this, he would always say, we're going to find a truck stop, a diner, because that's where you're going to get the best food. And he was right. Back then, that was where you got great food. And so that wanderlust kind of was embedded in me at a young age. But so when I was on the road, even now, I always look for those out-of-the-way places. When I'm working in other countries, I always look for the same thing. Those places that are sort of mom and pop-ish. But in the United States, one place that I have fallen in love with is Waffle House. No, the food is not good, really. If you break it down, but it's amazing. But even more so, it's Waffle House has a subculture, and it has several subcultures of that subculture depending on the time of day. And it's consistent all the way across the country. Wherever you find a Waffle House, you'll find that if you're there from, say, like 8 a.m. until noon, there's going to be a certain type of people in there. And it changes. And then when you start at about 11 p.m. and you go to about 2 a.m., there's a group. And then at 2 a.m., it shifts again. And it's amazing. But the thing that blew me away is the devotion of the people that work there. Mm-hmm. And I know that we all know they don't make much money, but they love it. In fact, one young woman I ran into at one of the Waffle Houses, I would always talk to them. I'd say, how long have you been, working at Waffle House and on, things like that. And she said, I was raised in a Waffle House. She said, my mother was a waitress and couldn't afford daycare. So she would bring me to work and I would spend my days in the Waffle House. And then when I became old enough, I started working in a Waffle House. But there's a camaraderie between the employees. They also tend to really get to know their customers, even if it's just for a night or a day or whatever the case may be. And they have their own lingo, which is wonderful too. And I also found at one point, by overhearing conversations, that the cooks and the waitresses tend to be women, and the cooks tend to be either men or women. And the waitresses will have an informal competition with waitresses from other Waffle Houses in the area as to how many ticket books they fill up on their shift. And the cooks will have that same kind of competition with other cooks at Waffle Houses on how many eggs they cook for the day or how many. So I thought, this is really great. They're taking this incredible pride in their job. And years ago, I remember there was a quote, and nobody knows who it was from, some ancient China somewhere, that said, it's not our work that ennobles us, but we that make our work noble. And that's what I found in almost every Waffle House, is they made their work noble. Mm-hmm. And so I love them. But diners, that's where you'll always find me if it's at all possible.
Right. Well, I have to wonder, when I think of a Waffle House, I think of almost like a refuge. It's reliable. It's always there. If you need to stop by at 2:00 in the morning, where do you go? You go to the Waffle House. I know lots of, high school students who will hang out at the Waffle House. It's a place to bond. And I wonder, working at a Waffle House has got to be, I've worked at an IHOP once. It's got to be hot and dirty and hard work. Yeah. It's got to be a serious work ethic to work at a place like that. But I imagine the attraction is just the people. It's the cultures. It is. Why do you love working at the Waffle House if it's not the money? It must be the people. It
is, and I've asked this question to many people that work at Waffle House, and the consistent answer is, one, it's the community that they build among the other employees, but it's also the people that come in, whether it's somebody that comes in off the road and it's the only time they'll be there, or people that come in, once a week or whatever, is they get to talk with them and they get to experience other thoughts and other ways of life and other cultures. And also, Waffle House is, you mentioned that, you can go in any time of day. They're open 24 hours. Waffle House is, I forget the terminology, but they are used by FEMA. When there's a disaster, the Waffle House in that community always stays open no matter what. If it's a tornado, whatever, as long as they can cook the food, they will stay open because it is a refuge.
Right.
And I just think that's incredible. And again, the people that work there, I just find them amazing.
Well, I find the portraits that you took of the people to be amazing because these are people who seem like they just fulfilled. Happy, satisfied, fulfilled. That's the kind of, if I had to describe what I'm seeing, these are not like people who look worn out and, I hate my job.
You're right.
They look like, they just like I'm really happy to be here.
Oh yeah, they are. There's, in fact, about a year ago, I was headed down Nolensville Road, and it was I was on the motorcycle, and the skies opened up, and there was a Waffle House, like 30 feet ahead. So I pulled in there and I went in and I met the one woman that was working there, the waitress. Her name was Najima, and she's since moved out west. But, I just started to have a conversation with her. And she was so thrilled to be working at Waffle House. Again, she didn't make much money, but as you just put it, she was fulfilled. And when people would come in, and there were regular customers, and there were a lot of immigrant families that came in, and she knew them by name, she knew their kids, she knew what the kids were going through, what grades they were in, and she had those conversations. So again, for those people, as you mentioned earlier, it was a refuge.
Okay. Well, I have to ask you though, when you go into a Waffle House, what do you order?
Great question. I ordered the All-American, and I have my eggs over medium, sausage patties. I have my hash browns scattered and burned, and toast, and no grits, and a waffle plain with butter and syrup on the side.
Okay.
And a cup of coffee.
How many waffles do you think you had during your project?
Far more than I should have.
Okay.
I still carry them with me in some regards.
Okay. Don't we all? Tell us about the Cowboys of Luckenbeck, Texas.
Oh, man.
How do these people, here's a stupid question, but I got to give you at least one. How do these Cowboys, what do they say about America?
They don't really say much. That's the thing. And I've talked and lived with Cowboys in various places, but Luckenbach, one of the things I love about it is...
I think of the song when I think about it.
I had never heard...
Willie and Waylon and those guys.
Yeah,
right?
Willie Waylon and the boys. Yeah. And I had never heard that song before. I'd heard about it. I never heard it before I went to Luckenbach.
Was it right?
And it is dead on. There are no song lyrics more dead on than the song for Luckenbach. And the slogan of the town is Luckenbach, Texas, where everybody is somebody.
Well, I want to move there.
So do I. It's incredible. I mean, it is absolutely one of the best places I've ever been. And I've been back many times because it's wonderful. And I think the whole town's only like 3 acres or something. I mean, people are just laid back and they let people be people. There's no judgments. So
they know how to listen.
They do. And they love to listen. And one guy I met, and there's a photograph of him in the exhibition, Tony. Tony's incredible. When he runs a shop that makes hats, cowboy hats. And that's what I just assumed he did. And he does now. And we talked for a while, and Tony was a man of very, very few words. If I would ask him a question, it would be, yep, nope, that kind of thing. But we had this great relationship going on. Finally, I asked him if I could make a photograph of him, and yep. And he sat there, and I made it. And then we talked for a while longer, and we left. And about 3 months later, I knew I'd be in Luckenbach, and I stopped by because every time I photograph someone, I always return at some point with a large photograph of the photograph I made of them, and I give it to them. And when I went back, he wasn't there, and his wife was. And we got talking, and she told me Tony's story, and this is mind-boggling. Well, to me it was. Is Tony, in his previous life, lived even more in the middle of nowhere, Texas. And he would be hired by ranchers to go out and find cattle rustlers that stole their cattle. And Tony would go off by himself on horseback with a rifle, a revolver, and a rope. And he would find the cattle rustlers, and he would rope them, and he would bring them back to be turned into the law. That's pretty cool. But then he started working for the DEA. And he would go out in the middle of nowhere on his horse with a rifle and a revolver and a rope to where drug deals were happening in the middle of nowhere. And he would rope them, and he would bring them to justice. And I thought, now that's one tough individual. But you never know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow. You've taken some wonderful photos of indigenous Americans there. You are through the Great Plains and beyond, I believe, in taking some of these photos. Tell me a little bit about these people. There was one woman in particular, was it Helen Gray Eyes?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about her. She was beautiful.
She is stunning. Helen is Dene. She's Navajo, but they go by Dene because the word Navajo was given to them by the Spanish, and it roughly translates to thieves with knives. And they said, we're not. And the Dene people are some of the most laid back and accepting of all the indigenous cultures, American Native cultures. And when I say American natives because they're not Native Americans, because America didn't exist when they were here first. It was only after we settled this, and so really they're American natives. Anyhow, I heard about Helen, and all the stories I heard about her, that I really want to photograph her, and primarily because she herded sheep and she did wool and did weavings. And so I made arrangements to meet with her, and she speaks no English. She only speaks Dene, but her sister, Alice, speaks fluent English. So they invited me to come to the house to talk, to see if it would work. And we talked, and I guess it was about an hour or two into it, they invited me to have lunch, stay for lunch. And that's, with an indigenous people, that's really huge. That means that they're starting to trust you. And so we talked some more. And I realized in looking at Helen that, as you point out, she's beautiful. And I wanted to make a portrait of her. So I asked that. That's why I said, can I? And they said, well, we'll talk about it. And so I would go back to visit with her periodically. And finally, I was able to photograph her herding her sheep. And a quick side story about Helen is her daily routine is she wakes up in the morning, gets dressed, feeds the dogs, then goes out and runs 1 mile down the road and runs 1 mile back, and then she goes and herds her sheep. Yeah, and the road is heavily rutted. I mean, it's hard, but this is what she does every day. And when I photographed her, she was 84 years old. And so anyhow, I finally got to photograph her herding her sheep, and then we had set a date for me to make a portrait of her. And about 3 weeks before that happened, I was here in Nashville, and I had an accident on my motorcycle. And the top of my shoulder hit the ground and stopped at 60 miles an hour, and I shattered my collarbone and broke all these ribs. And I didn't have a primary care doctor, so I couldn't get a surgeon in time. And I had to go and do this portrait. So I drove to northern Arizona with my arm in a sling, and I made the portrait of her. And it was beyond incredible. And at one point, we were in the room together when her daughter and her sister went off to do something. And here are two people that do not share a common language at all. But yet...
I also just have to say, how remarkable is that to find somebody who is that much part of her traditional culture?
She's very much a part. She is, and one thing to understand about the Dene culture is the women are the power. Okay, men are subservient essentially to women. Women take care of the finances, women take care of the household, women take care of pretty much everything, and the men are told what to do. But Helen lived alone. Her husband had died many years before. She lived by herself. But we were in the room together, not able to speak the language, each other's language, but we still got along. And at one point, when I went back to photograph Helen shearing sheep, which here's this woman, by this time she's 85, and she takes the sheep and she manhandles them, rolls them back and forth, does what she has to, and takes the manual cutting shears and shears sheep. It was incredible, but I was married at the time. And my wife was there when this was happening, and Helen, through her sister translating, told my wife, if you want to keep David, you have to pay us a dowry because he's our family. So I had, and really they considered me an in-law.
Wow.
And to this day.
So when you're in with that culture.
You are, yeah. And it's inappropriate for a single Dene woman to physically touch a married man. Even to a pat on the back or anything. It's just not done. And it got to be funny because, and I don't know how this happened, but even though Helen didn't understand a word of my language, if I would make a joke, she would get it and she would start to laugh. And she would get excited and she'd want to put her arm around me and hug me, but then she'd pull back because it's inappropriate and she struggled. But we developed that kind of a relationship. And it was all built on trust and me keeping my word. But she's a phenomenal human being.
Well, speaking of very inspiring photos, we started off our conversation talking about that young boy crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge and how inspiring he was. There was a indigenous boy, I believe it was a grass dancer.
Grass dancer?
Grass dancer,
Yeah.
yes. Tell me, he looked amazing. And again, I see the future I see
yeah.
that photo.
And great perception on your part again is that's Jackson. And Jackson's Lakota. And the Lakota are one of the American native tribes, the indigenous, that lost most of their culture. They had truly been beaten out of them by the missionaries primarily and the Catholic schools that they were forced to go to. And so they have been over the years, the decades, trying to revive their culture. And some of the things they don't know what was. So they're creating similar things. And one of them is fancy dancing. And Jackson was a young fancy dancer, and his role was the grass dancer. So his outfit resembles, if you look at it, resembles the tall grasses of the plains as they blow in the wind. And then his dance resembles that. He dances in a manner that he moves like the grasses of the prairie.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was very beautiful. Well, we're going to take one more break, and when we return, we're going to ask David Farmerie about his plans to return to the road.
Matters of the Heart Counseling reminds us that arts education is an essential part of a balanced education. It helps students develop creativity, critical thinking skills, and problem solving. Matters of the Heart Counseling, with locations in Hendersonville, Goodlettsville, and Gallatin. Find them online at mattersoftheheartcounseling.org.
So, David, I understand that what you've created so far is a phase one. Is that correct? Are you going to be going back out on the road, Willie Nelson style, to tell us more about America, find out some more?
I am. And, when this project started, there was no phase one. It was just this project. But as I was going on, probably beginning about a year or so into it, I started to feel like there was more that needed to be told. But for this project, I was kind of mandated to how I was going to tell the story or what story to tell, which was based on, is this all that America is about? And so after I came off the road and really looked at everything, it got clear. And I realized, I guess about a year ago, that my belief, at least, is that 2024 and 2025 are going to be a pivotal moment in the history of the United States. And it doesn't matter who gets elected, to offices. It doesn't matter about anything. It's going to be pivotal regardless. And what that pivot is going to be, I have no idea. But I believe that this is the time to tell the story of America as it is now, whatever that is. So instead of going into it with the question of, is this all America is about? I'm going into it as I want to just see America for what it is, good or bad, indifferent, and I want to document it. But the other difference is going to be that in phase one, everything was captured digitally, with digital cameras. With the second phase, I want to capture as much of it as I can using film.
Okay.
Because digital is not going to last into the future. I mean, the technology will, but the files won't. In fact, years ago, I was lecturing for a grad program at University of Texas, and the professor was saying she just came back from a lecture, and the person speaking said that they've realized that within the next 50 years or so, there will be virtually no visual record of these generations.
Oh my gosh.
Because everything is being stored on phones and on social media. In fact, great example, a dear friend of mine who's been posting his work, a photographer, posting his work to Instagram every single day for the last 6 years, I think he said, is all of a sudden he posted something the other day and a notice came up from Instagram. It said, we have permanently disabled your account. For no reason. I mean, he was just posting wonderful images. And all those images now, he can't retrieve them. They're gone. But whereas film, there's a physical record of it, as long as it doesn't succumb to a fire or a flood. And I want that because I believe that these 2 years are going to be historically valid for the future, that people can look back on And in order to maintain that archival integrity, it has to be on film.
Wow. Well, I was so excited when our regional director, Ruth Chase, mentioned that you were going to be coming and doing this talk. You're going to be talking at Monhaven later today. You've got another exhibit coming to Monhaven because you really have a message of hope. And I'm thinking this summer is a great time for us to talk to you, because I fear that the prevailing campaign that's upon us now is going to be kind of maybe just a little bit more enlightening than a food fight. And so I'm just wondering, what, just as a final word, we're all going to have to go through this. What is your message to your fellow Americans?
It's that a couple of things. One is, if you really take a look at it, we have been living under paradigms of hatred and anger and disillusionment. And for me, it's the disillusionment that's the culprit to the hatred and anger. And again, it's not one side, political side or another. It's not one religion or another. It's just pervasive. Everybody is keeping us disillusioned to keep themselves in power, making money, whatever it is. But we can break those paradigms. And I'm seeing people now that are starting to break these paradigms down and shift them. But the one thing of everything I've talked about, and even tonight with the talk, is that what I found without any doubt whatsoever, proof positive, is that America, and when I say America, there are two Americas. There are two of every country. There's the political America, that which is governed and laws are made by politicians and whatnot. And then there's the America of the society, the people, the citizenry. And that's the citizenry that makes a country great or not great. And what I have found is that the majority of Americans are filled with hope, and they exhibit hope. And the majority of Americans are so incredibly resilient and perseverant to keep coming back and saying, no, we're going to make this a better place. We can make this, because it's really the few that are trying to take this away and make it something different. But the majority of Americans that I found in the 4.5 years on the road want to get along, and they want to keep making America a great country, because it always has been. And that's what I would like. I think, if anything, leave that with everybody, is all we have to do is step outside of the fear and be willing to engage with other people. And it's so easy, because all we have to do is listen and be respectful and not feel threatened and not try to change anyone's opinion. You can disagree with another person's beliefs, but it doesn't mean that you can't get along with them.
Right.
I mean, look at families. Every family, you have bickering all the time, disagreeing, but they still love each other.
Yeah. Well, Aretha Franklin was right. It's respect.
It is. That's the key word. Respect the other person as you would have them respect you. That's all people want. And that's the one of the main things I found through every person I engage with, is they just want to be heard. They don't want to be agreed with. They want to be heard.
And respect it. Yeah.
And respect it.
So turn off the cable TV, shut off that cell phone, and go out and talk to your neighbors.
Talk to your neighbors. Engage in community and talk to your neighbors. Yes.
There you go. David Farmerie, photojournalist and the creator of the wonderful project In Search of America. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for this opportunity.
You've been listening to MACC Talk from Monhaven Arts and Cultural Center. Our mission is to educate, elevate, and encourage our community through the transformative power of the arts. If you're interested in transforming your creative life, check out our website at monthavenarts.org. Our guest today was photojournalist David Farmerie. Our podcast music was written by Nashville composer Christina Spinay. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.